Picture this. A private dining room on the 38th floor of a Manhattan high-rise, 40 guests in evening wear, candles on every table, and a man in a navy suit raising a glass of wine that costs more than most people's car payment. That man is my father. And in about an hour, he is going to stand up in front of everyone he respects and tell the room that his own daughter never amounted to anything. He has no idea what I do for a living. He has no idea how much money moves through my hands every single day. And he is about to find out in the worst possible way, in front of the one person in that room whose opinion actually controls his company's future. I want to tell you exactly how we got to that table, because this isn't a story about a rich family fighting over money. It's about a father who decided, when I was 18 years old, that my dreams weren't worth his support. It's about a stepmother who spent 20 years quietly erasing me from a family photograph. And it's about 7 years of silence that ended the moment I walked into a room my father never expected to see me in. Here's what makes this different from every other family dinner gone wrong. The banker sitting across the table that night wasn't just a guest. He held the one thing my father needed more than his pride, his company's credit line. And that banker had known me for years, just not by the name my father was using. By the time dessert was served, my father would say 6 words to me in front of 40 people. The same 6 words he said to me 7 years earlier at Thanksgiving. He thought he was making a point. What he didn't know was that someone at that table was about to stand up and correct him, in front of everyone, with a number that would change the way every single person in that room looked at me for the rest of the night. I'm not going to rush to that part. I want you to understand everything that led up to it, because the ending only means something once you know what it cost to get there. Watching from where? Please comment. My name is Audrey Lane, and this is the night my father found out exactly who I became. I'm 33 years old. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn Heights. No doorman, no view. The radiator clanks at 4 in the morning, and I've trained myself to sleep through it. I keep 3 plants on the windowsill, a fern, a pothos, and something I picked up at a corner store that refuses to die no matter how badly I neglect it. That's about as much luxury as I allow myself. I'm up every morning by 5:15. By 5:45, I'm at my office in Tribeca. It's a simple space, glass walls, 23 employees, and nothing on the walls except a whiteboard covered in equations that look like nonsense to most people and look like money to me. My company is called Viridian Capital. We run a quantitative hedge fund, which is a fancy way of saying we build software that reads the stock market faster and more accurately than any team of human traders on Wall Street. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, algorithmic trading. If none of that means anything to you, just know this. Last quarter, our models beat every major market index by 11%. We currently manage $14 billion. I don't give interviews. I don't sit on panels. I don't post on social media. My results speak for themselves. Most people in finance have heard of Viridian. Almost nobody has seen my face. And my father, Walter Lane, CEO of Lane Capital Partners, a firm on Park Avenue. I hadn't spoken to him in 7 years. No blow-up, no dramatic goodbye. Just silence. The kind that settles in once someone shows you exactly who they are and you finally decide to believe them. I was fine with that. All of it. Until a cream-colored envelope showed up on my desk on a Tuesday in November. My parents divorced when I was 13. My mother, Diane Foster, taught 10th grade English at a public school in Bridgeport, Connecticut. My father ran numbers. She ran sentences. They met at a fundraiser in 1988 and got married 3 months later, which tells you everything you need to know about how Walter Lane makes decisions. Fast, confident, and without asking anyone else's opinion. For 13 years, that worked. Then it didn't. The reasons don't matter much anymore. What matters is what came after. My father moved to Greenwich. He paid the legal minimum in child support for someone in his income bracket, bought a 6-bedroom house with a heated pool, and sent my mother just enough to cover groceries and half the electric bill. 18 months after the divorce, he married Renata. She brought a 7-year-old son named Corey from her first marriage, along with a talent for redecorating, a membership at the country club, and an opinion about everything. I still visited every other weekend, the way the custody agreement required, but every time I walked through that door, something had changed. First it was my old bedroom, turned into a home gym. Then it was the hallway photos. My school pictures came down. Corey's baseball trophies went up. My mother never said a bad word about any of it. She'd stand at the kitchen counter grading papers and tell me, "Your father loves you in the only way he knows how." I believed her for 13 more years. I kept showing up, kept calling, kept telling myself the silence on his end was just a busy schedule and not something intentional. Then came the day I stopped pretending. When I turned 18, I earned a full scholarship to Columbia to study applied mathematics. I remember exactly where I was when the call came, sitting on my mother's porch in Bridgeport. The financial aid office said the words full tuition, and my mother started crying into a dish towel. We drove to the diner on Route 1 and split a piece of coconut cream pie, and she told me, "This is the beginning of something, Audrey." She was right. My father had a different reaction. "Skip it," he said. We were in his study in Greenwich. Corey was in the next room watching cartoons, and Renata was arranging flowers in the hallway. "Come work at the firm. You don't need a degree. You need real experience." I told him I wanted to study mathematics, that I was good at it, that this scholarship was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He leaned back in his chair. "Math? You want to sit in a classroom doing math while I'm building something real?" I said yes. He cut off everything beyond what the court required. No tuition help, no housing, no car, nothing. Renata made it worse, the way she always did. She'd call my mother's house and leave messages. "Walter is heartbroken. Audrey is so stubborn. She thinks she's smarter than him." She told people at the country club that I'd turned my back on the family business. She told Corey, who was 12 at the time, that I was selfish. So he started showing up at the firm on Saturdays in a little blazer, sitting in on meetings he couldn't possibly understand, while my father paraded him around like a prize. I worked 2 jobs through college and graduated with honors. My father didn't come to the ceremony. He sent a card instead. Inside, 1 line. "Hope it was worth it." After Columbia, I got a job at Sterling and Cross, one of the largest investment banks in New York, as a junior quantitative analyst making $85,000 a year. I thought I was rich. I wasn't. Manhattan cures you of that feeling fast. But the work saved me. I spent 14, sometimes 16 hours a day building trading models, learning the language of risk the same way my mother had learned Shakespeare, line by line, late at night, with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. Nobody taught me. I taught myself, because I refused to be the one person in the room who didn't understand the math. My second year, I earned my first real bonus, just over $4,000 after taxes. I walked into a jewelry store and bought a simple watch. Not to show it off. I wore it under my sleeve so I could glance at my wrist every morning at 5:45 and remind myself of one thing. I earned this. Nobody gave it to me. My boss at the time, a sharp, old-school vice president named Charles Bennett, started noticing me. He began handing me the complicated models the senior analysts avoided. I still called my father once a month. He always answered, and he always asked the same question. "When are you going to do something real?" Then came Thanksgiving of 2019, the last one I ever spent with him. I drove 2 hours from Brooklyn to Greenwich on a cold Thursday morning. My mother had stopped attending his holidays years earlier, quietly, without ever explaining why. I went alone. The house looked the same. The heated pool glowed turquoise through the back windows. Renata had set the table for 14, family plus 4 of my father's business partners and their wives. Crystal glasses, cloth napkins, a centerpiece that probably cost more than my rent. Corey, 20 now and home from Dartmouth, wore a cashmere sweater and talked loudly about an internship at a major bank that Renata had arranged through a friend. He hadn't earned it. He didn't need to. I sat next to a portfolio manager named Ashford and his wife, who asked what I did for work. I told her I was a quantitative analyst. She smiled politely. My father overheard from the head of the table. "Audrey," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "tell them about your big plan." I didn't want to. He pushed anyway. So I told the table I was researching the idea of launching my own fund, a quantitative fund built on machine learning. My father laughed. Renata laughed with him, half a second late, the way she always did. "A fund?" he said. "With what money?" He looked around the table, inviting everyone to share the joke. "You don't have the instinct, Audrey. You have theories." Then he raised his glass, smiled, and said the 6 words I would carry in my chest for years. "You'll never make a dime, Audrey." I set down my napkin. I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I looked at my father and said, "Thank you for dinner." Then I walked out, past the pool, past the centerpiece, past all 14 place settings. I drove 2 hours home in complete silence. My hands didn't even shake until I'd parked the car. That night my mother called and I just told her, "I'm okay, Mom. I just need to work." So I worked. In 2020, I left Sterling and Cross. I took every dollar I'd saved, just over 200,000, combined it with a small business loan, and launched Viridian Capital. 3 employees, a shared office space in Jersey City, a desk I bought secondhand for $40. I coded the first algorithm myself. That first year, we returned 34%. No marketing, no press, just performance. Word spread quietly through the quant community, the way it always does. By 2022, we'd crossed 400 million in assets. I moved the office to Tribeca and hired 9 more people. In 2023, Charles Bennett, my old boss, now a managing director at Sterling and Cross, called me directly and asked to become our prime broker. He knew me by my mother's maiden name, Foster, which I'd used professionally since the beginning. He never asked why. Good bankers never do. By 2024, we'd crossed 3 billion, and I started using the name Lane again on legal documents. It was my name. I wasn't going to hide from it forever. By 2025, Viridian managed $14 billion. A major business magazine featured us in a piece on AI-driven funds. I turned down the interview. They ran the story anyway, focused entirely on the algorithm and not the person behind it. That suited me fine. My father never called. I never called him. My mother knew I was doing well, but she never knew the exact numbers. She didn't need to. 7 years, no contact, no birthday cards, no holidays, just work, silence, and a thin sterling silver bracelet on my left wrist, the one my mother gave me the day I graduated from Columbia. She wears the matching one. Then, on a Tuesday in November, Charles Bennett's assistant called my office. "Audrey, Charles would like to invite you to a year-end investor dinner in Midtown, December 14th. Private dining room, 40 guests. He says it's important." I told her I'd think about it. Then I asked who was hosting. "Lane Capital Partners," she said. "A Walter Lane. Do you know him?" I paused for 3 seconds, maybe 4. "It's a common name," I said. I hung up and sat at my desk for a long time. The invitation itself arrived by courier 2 days later, heavy cream cardstock, gold lettering, the Lane Capital Partners logo in the corner. I could have said no. I could have told Charles the truth. That Walter Lane was my father, that we hadn't spoken in 7 years, that the last thing he'd ever said to me was that I'd never make a dime. Charles would have understood. He would have quietly removed my name from the guest list and never mentioned it again. But I was 33 years old. I ran a $14 billion fund, and I was still letting one man's opinion decide which rooms I was willing to walk into. So I chose to go. Not for my father, for me, because I was done avoiding rooms. I called my mother that evening and told her about the dinner. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You don't have to go, sweetheart." I told her, "I know, Mom. That's exactly why I'm going." She laughed softly, the way she does when she's proud and worried at the same time. "Wear the bracelet," she said. "Always do." December 14th was 8 days away. I set the invitation on my desk and went back to my models. 7 years of silence, 1 phone call, and now I was about to walk into my father's dinner as a guest of his most important banker, and he had absolutely no idea I'd be there. If you've ever walked into a room where someone underestimated you, you already know exactly how this feels. Hit subscribe, because what happens at this dinner, you're going to want to hear every word of it. On the evening of December 14th, I stood in front of my closet at 5:30 and made a choice that probably would have driven Renata crazy if she'd ever found out. I picked the simplest thing I owned, a plain black dress, knee-length, long sleeves, nothing that said anything about how much money I had. I put on my watch, fastened my mother's silver bracelet next to it, pulled my hair back, and slipped on flat shoes. No stylist, no blowout. I don't perform power with height. Then I called a car. On the ride into Midtown, I pulled up Charles's guest list on my tablet. 40 names: hedge fund managers, family office directors, 2 corporate attorneys, a retired senator. And near the top, Renata Lane, co-host. Corey Lane, vice president, Lane Capital Partners. I read Corey's title 3 times. He was 27, 4 years out of Dartmouth, no graduate degree, no analyst training, just a last name and a blazer. I set the tablet down and watched Manhattan go by. Holiday lights on Fifth Avenue, taxis crawling, people carrying shopping bags. The city didn't care about my family. That was comforting. The car pulled up to a high-rise on West 57th Street. A doorman opened my door. I checked my watch, walked into the lobby, and took the elevator to the 38th floor. The doors opened directly into the dining room. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Central Park, dark and glowing with streetlights. Candles flickered on 8 round tables. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The room smelled like warm bread and expensive cologne. 40 or so people stood around holding champagne, laughing the way people laugh at parties. Not because something is funny, but because it's what you do while you wait for the real conversation to begin. I spotted my father immediately, standing near the windows. Silver hair, trimmed short, navy suit, gold cufflinks engraved with his initials. He held a glass of red wine and gestured broadly, while a small cluster of men nodded along. Renata stood beside him in a red dress, moving between groups, touching elbows, smiling with all her teeth, a role she'd been rehearsing for 20 years. Corey stood at the bar, laughing too loudly at something nobody else found funny, his suit jacket pulled tight across his shoulders like he was wearing his father's clothes. None of them had noticed me yet. I took a glass of water from a passing tray and watched. My father raised his wineglass to the room. To another year of building something that lasts. Everyone drank. I didn't. Charles found me before I'd finished my water. He crossed the room with that long, unhurried walk of his and shook my hand with both of his. Audrey, glad you made it. Come, there are some people I want you to meet. He walked me through the room, introducing me to a family office director from Boston, a hedge fund manager from Connecticut, a woman running a private equity firm out of San Francisco. He never once mentioned Viridian's size in front of the other guests. He just said, Audrey runs one of the sharpest quant funds I've ever worked with. People nodded. People handed me cards. At one point, the hedge fund manager from Connecticut tilted his head. Lane, he said. Like the Lane? Walter Lane. Are you related? I took a sip of water. It's a common name. He accepted that. People in finance don't push when you deflect. They file it away and look you up later. My father was still across the room, deep in conversation, probably with prospective clients given how hard he was performing. Renata hadn't crossed my path yet. Then Corey walked past, heading to the bar, and stopped mid-stride to stare at me for a solid 3 seconds. His mouth opened slightly, then he kept walking, like he recognized the face but couldn't place it. I turned the silver bracelet once around my wrist. Renata spotted me about 6 minutes later. She was making her rounds, and when she turned and saw me, she froze, just for a moment. Then the smile came back, bigger and sharper. Audrey. She crossed the distance in 4 quick steps. My goodness, I almost didn't recognize you. Her voice carried. The nearest couple turned to look. Everyone, she said, placing a hand on my arm in a gesture that looked warm and felt like a leash. This is Audrey, Walter's daughter from his first marriage. She's been away for a while. Away. She said it the way you'd say in rehab or out of her mind. Not estranged, not pushed out. Away, like I'd simply forgotten to come home from a long vacation. Hello, Renata, I said. You look well. Thank you, sweetheart. She tilted her head. What brings you here tonight? Are you someone's +1? The question landed like a slap wrapped in silk. I was invited, I said. Her smile flickered. Her eyes dropped to the embossed invitation I'd set on the cocktail table, my name printed clearly under the RSVP confirmation, and lingered there 1 beat too long. Well, she said. How nice. She excused herself with a squeeze of my arm that left a faint mark on my skin and walked directly to my father, leaning in to whisper something in his ear. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. His jaw tightened. He set down his wine glass. And for the first time in 7 years, my father looked across the room and saw me standing in it. He came to me, of course. Walter Lane doesn't get summoned. He arrives. He crossed the room slowly, buttoning his jacket as he walked, a small habit of composure I'd forgotten he had. Renata stayed by the bar, watching like a coach on the sideline. Audrey. He stopped 3 feet away and smiled. The professional smile. The one he used on clients, not the one he used when I was 10 and brought home a perfect math test. What a surprise! I didn't realize you knew anyone here. I know a few people. He nodded slowly, his eyes moving over my dress, my shoes, my watch, appraising me the way he'd appraise a balance sheet. Whatever number he landed on, it wasn't impressive enough to change his expression. We should talk, he said, dropping his voice. Not here. Come to my office next week. His office, his schedule, his terms. That was Walter, always negotiating, always choosing the venue. I'm here now, I said. If you'd like to talk, we can talk tonight. His jaw shifted. He wasn't used to hearing no, especially not from me. Before he could respond, Corey appeared at his shoulder. He'd finally placed the face. Wait, Audrey, you actually came? He turned to his father. Dad, did you invite her? My father's answer was flat and quiet. No. Like it was an answer to more than just that question. A server rang a small bell, and the room began to settle into seats. My place card was at table 1, the main table, 10 seats, right at the center of the room. Charles had arranged the seating himself, putting me 4 chairs from my father with a clear line of sight across the white tablecloth. My father sat at the head, Renata to his right, Corey to his left, Charles directly across from him, and me between Charles and a silver-haired woman who ran a family trust out of Greenwich. As I sat down, I noticed a small leather booklet on each plate, the evening's program. I opened it while the servers poured water. Page 1. Welcome remarks from Walter Lane. Page 2. A timeline of Lane Capital's 30-year history, heavy on nostalgia, light on recent performance. Page 3 stopped me cold. Featured remarks, Charles Bennett, Managing Director, Sterling and Cross. And underneath, in smaller type, Credit Facility Review, Lane Capital Partners. I read it twice. Then I understood. This dinner wasn't a celebration, it was an audition. My father was performing for Charles. The wine, the venue, the string quartet, all of it was designed to impress the one man in the room holding the keys to his credit line. And that man, Charles Bennett, was my prime broker. Viridian's brokerage fees alone generated more annual revenue for his bank than Lane Capital's entire relationship. $14 billion flowing through Charles's desk, managed by the woman sitting 4 chairs from Walter Lane. I closed the booklet and sat very still. My father needed Charles. Charles needed me. And nobody in that room except me understood both halves of that equation. The first course arrived. Oysters on crushed ice. The room settled into the rhythm of a formal dinner, silverware clinking, small talk filling the gaps between bites. My father took command of the table immediately, leaning back in his chair with his wine in hand, telling the story he always told, how he started his firm with $200,000 and a folding table, how Wall Street laughed at him in the beginning, how he built something that lasted. He was good at it, charming, rehearsed. He made eye contact with Charles when he talked about risk, and with the Greenwich woman when he talked about trust. He never once looked at me. Renata played her part, nodding, laughing, touching my father's arm like a stage manager cueing applause. Corey tried to impress Charles with a question about portfolio allocation, quoting a ratio confidently and getting it wrong by a full point. I watched Charles glance at his phone and type something. A note, a flag. I ate my oyster. I listened. I said nothing. The silver-haired woman beside me leaned over. You're very quiet, she said. I'm a good listener, I told her. She smiled. In this room, that makes you rare. She wasn't wrong. Everyone at that table was performing for someone. I was the only one with nothing to prove. When the main course arrived, my father stood and tapped his glass with a knife. The room went quiet. 30 years ago, he said, I started this firm with $200,000 and a card table in a rented office. No investors, no connections, just conviction. This firm is my legacy. It is my life's work. He looked at Renata, my wife, who has been my partner in every sense of the word. Then at Corey. And my son, vice president of this firm, the next generation of leadership. He raised his glass. This firm is my family, and my family is this firm. He didn't mention me. I was sitting 10 feet away, and he'd introduced his wife, his stepson, and his company, and skipped straight past the daughter who shared his blood and his last name, like I was a water glass someone had set at the wrong seat. Charles looked at me, then back at my father, his brow creasing for just a second. Corey, a couple of drinks in by then, turned to me loudly enough for half the table to hear. "So, Audrey, what are you up to these days? Still playing with math equations?" I set down my fork. "I work in finance." "Finance?" he said, the way you'd say finger painting. "Like what? A bookkeeper?" A few people laughed, the uncomfortable kind. Charles didn't. He watched. "I'm kidding," Corey said, grinning. "But seriously, it's got to be rough starting from scratch with no connections. Dad always said you'd figure it out eventually." "Eventually is a long time," I said. "I found a shorter path." He missed it entirely and turned back to his wine. Renata didn't. She looked at me with narrowed eyes, then turned to the Greenwich woman beside me. "Audrey always was independent," she said, loud enough for the table. "A little too independent, if you ask me. Some people just pull away from family and then wonder why nobody reaches out." She smiled the practiced, pleasant smile of a woman who'd spent 2 decades rewriting the past in real time. Charles set down his fork and tilted his head, the way he did during quarterly reviews when he was recalculating a position. He was paying very close attention now. When dessert came out, Renata made her move. She turned to a couple across the table and said with perfect warmth, "You know, we tried so hard to include Audrey over the years. Holidays, birthdays, we always left the door open. But some people just aren't built for family." She shook her head, wistful, playing the heartbroken stepmother waiting for a daughter who never came home. Then she turned to me, full eye contact, smile fixed, eyes not matching it. "This table is for people who built something, Audrey. What exactly have you built?" The question hung there. A few people stopped chewing. I picked up my coffee, took a sip, set it back down without a sound. "Something that keeps me busy," I said. My father chuckled. "That's one way to put it." Renata smiled wider. Corey laughed. The table exhaled. I set the invitation down beside my plate and folded my hands in my lap, and I thought that would be the end of it. A quiet insult, a quiet deflection, and dessert. But my father wasn't finished. He was never finished when there was an audience. He pushed back his chair and stood again, wine glass in hand like a prop, that loose, confident half-smile on his face. "You know what I tell young people?" he said to the room. "Don't chase fantasies. Don't waste years on a degree when you could be building something real." He paused, let it land, then turned to me. "My daughter here chose theory over practice. She wanted to sit in a library studying algorithms instead of joining the family business. And look where that got her." "Where did it get me, Dad?" I asked. He laughed. Not a mean laugh. Worse, a pitying one. The kind that says I love you, but you're a disappointment, and everyone here can see it. "Audrey, I love you, but let's be honest." He looked at my plain dress, my flat shoes. 7 years, and you still can't afford a decent dress. You'll never make a dime chasing algorithms. I told you that 7 years ago. He lifted his wine glass and smiled. "I'm telling you now." The room went completely still. 40 people, and nobody moved. A server near the kitchen door stopped mid-step. Renata's lips curled at the edges. Corey nodded slowly, like a verdict had just been read. And Charles Bennett, who had sat quietly through the toast, through Corey's jabs, through Renata's performance, set his napkin down on the table. His face had gone red, not embarrassed red, angry red. I looked down at my wrist, turned the silver bracelet once, and breathed. Then Charles pushed back his chair and stood up. The room turned toward him the way a courtroom turns toward a judge. He was the evening's most important guest, the man my father had spent 30 years of reputation and one very expensive dinner trying to impress. "Walter," he said, his voice calm and measured, the voice of a man who has delivered bad news to billionaires and never changed his tone for it. "May I say something?" My father smiled, thinking this was the moment Charles would praise the firm, extend the credit line. "Of course, Charles. The floor is yours." Charles straightened his cuffs and looked at the room. "I've known your daughter for 4 years." The smile on my father's face cracked at the edges. "You know Audrey?" "Professionally," Charles said. "Very well, actually. And I need to correct something you just said." The silence deepened. Somewhere behind the kitchen door, a plate clinked against a counter. The candle nearest me flickered and steadied. 40 people, all watching a managing director of Sterling and Cross prepare to contradict the host of the evening in front of everyone who mattered in Walter Lane's professional life. "Correction," Charles said. One word, and I knew everything was about to change. He spoke the way he spoke on quarterly earnings calls. Data, precision, zero emotion. "Ms. Lane is the founder and CEO of Viridian Capital." My father blinked. "Viridian?" He knew the name. Everyone at that table knew the name. It was legendary in the quant world, the fund that had outperformed every major index for 5 straight years using models nobody outside the firm fully understood. He just hadn't known who ran it. "Viridian manages $14 billion in assets," Charles continued, his voice carrying across every table. "Last quarter alone, Audrey's algorithms beat every major index by 11%. He paused, let the number settle, then looked at me with a small, almost imperceptible nod. "And as of last Friday's independent valuation, Ms. Lane crossed billionaire status. Personal net worth." Silence. Not the polite kind. The kind where 40 people simultaneously realize they've just watched a man humiliate someone who could buy his entire company with 1/4's returns. My father's face drained of color. His hand trembled around the stem of his wine glass. He didn't drink. He couldn't. Renata's mouth opened, closed, opened again. That can't be right." Corey's jaw actually dropped as he looked from me to Charles and back, like he was trying to find the trick. Charles wasn't finished. "Walter, I came here tonight to evaluate your credit line. I should mention, Viridian's brokerage fees alone are worth 12 times your firm's annual revenue to my bank." He straightened his glasses. "Your daughter isn't someone who can't afford a decent dress. She's the most valuable client I have." He sat back down and picked up his coffee. The string quartet did not resume. My father stood, then sat, then half rose again, like a man who'd forgotten whether he was arriving or leaving. "Audrey, I had no idea." Renata started crying, right on cue, perfectly timed, pressing a napkin to her eyes and turning to the couple beside her. "This isn't fair. Walter built this firm from nothing, and now his own daughter comes here to humiliate him." She was already rewriting the story. She'd had 20 years of practice. Corey went the other direction, his face flushing dark, his palms slapping the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. "So what? So she got lucky with some algorithm. That doesn't make her family. She left. She abandoned us. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who was here every day while she was off doing whatever she was doing." "Corey." My voice stayed steady. I looked at him the way you look at a spreadsheet with a bad formula. "I didn't leave." I turned to Renata, whose tears had already started drying. "Your mother helped lock the door." The table went quiet again. The couple beside Renata looked at her, then at my father, then at the napkin she was twisting in her hands like a rope. My father's voice came out hoarse. "Audrey, can we talk? Privately?" Privately. Every word he'd said tonight had been public. The toast, the jokes, the 6 words about dimes. He'd chosen an audience for all of it. Why should my answer be any different? I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. When a room is already this silent, a whisper carries like a shout. "Dad." I looked at him, really looked, at the silver hair, the monogrammed cufflinks, the wine he hadn't been able to touch since Charles sat back down. "I didn't come here tonight to embarrass you. I came because Charles invited me to a business dinner. I didn't know it was yours until I read the program. He opened his mouth. I kept going. You asked me 7 years ago what I was building. Tonight, you have your answer. I kept my voice even, the way I do on investor calls. Clear, factual, no performance in it. But I want to be clear about something. I didn't build Viridian because of what you said to me at Thanksgiving. I built it because I'm good at what I do. Your opinion of me, then or now, never factored into my spreadsheet. His eyes were wet. Renata had stopped crying. Corey had stopped shouting. The whole room was holding its breath. I'm not here to save your firm, I said. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because I earned a seat at this table, just like everyone else. Audrey, please, he said, his voice breaking on my name. Let me. You had 7 years, Dad. I picked up my clutch from the back of the chair. 7 Christmases, 7 birthdays. You didn't call, you didn't write, you chose silence. I looked at him. So did I. I held the clutch at my side and said the last thing I planned to say to my father that night. I didn't leave, Dad. You locked the door. He flinched, a full-body flinch, like a man bracing for impact half a second too late. His hand tightened on the back of his chair. His mouth moved, but nothing came out. I turned to Charles. Thank you for the invitation. I'll see you at our first quarter review. He nodded once. Looking forward to it, Audrey. I walked to the elevator. My flats made no sound on the marble. No heels clicking, no dramatic exit music, just a woman in a black dress leaving a party that was never hers to begin with. Nobody stopped me. Nobody spoke. 40 people watched me cross the room. The portfolio manager, the Greenwich woman, the retired senator, the servers standing frozen at the kitchen door. Renata with mascara running, a napkin balled in her fist. Corey, hands flat on the table, staring at nothing. And my father, standing at the head of his own table, mouth half open, watching me the way you watch a door close that you know you'll never get to open again. The elevator doors closed behind me. On the table, my invitation still sat next to his untouched glass of wine. Cream cardstock, gold letters, my name printed clearly, after 7 years of him trying to pretend I didn't exist. The lobby was empty. A doorman held the door and said, "Good evening, ma'am." I stepped out onto West 57th Street. December in Manhattan, 34 degrees, my breath forming small clouds. The sidewalk was full of holiday shoppers and tourists pointing at the lights strung between buildings. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody cared. That felt right. I walked 2 blocks without calling a car. I needed the cold. I needed air that didn't smell like wine and cologne, and the particular staleness that builds up when too many egos share a room. I stopped in front of a store window with a Christmas display. Mechanical elves, fake snow, a little train winding through tiny houses. My reflection looked back at me. Black dress, flat shoes, my watch on one wrist, my mother's bracelet on the other. I called my mother. "Hi, Mom." My voice cracked, the first thing that had slipped all night. "How did it go, sweetheart?" He said it again. "You'll never make a dime, in front of 40 people. She was quiet for 3 seconds. "And what did you do?" I let someone else tell the truth, then I walked out. "I'm proud of you, Audrey." Her voice was the steadiest thing I'd heard all night. "Not because of the money, because you walked out." She paused. "Was it worth it? Going tonight?" I looked down at the bracelet and ran my thumb across it. "Yeah, Mom, it was." We stayed on the phone 12 more minutes. She told me about her fern. I told her about mine. Neither of us mentioned my father again. I didn't see what happened after I left, but Charles told me later, over coffee 2 days before Christmas. The room never recovered. Guests started leaving within 5 minutes, citing early flights and headaches. 3 of them approached Charles on their way out asking about Viridian, handing him cards, saying they'd love a conversation if I was ever taking outside capital. My father tried to save the evening, standing up and announcing too loudly, "She's my daughter. Of course she learned from the best." The people still in the room looked at him the way you look at someone trying to take credit for a sunrise. Renata cornered Charles near the elevator. "Charles, please. Walter didn't mean what he said. He's a good father, he's just under a lot of pressure. Charles gently removed her hand from his arm. Mrs. Lane, I know exactly what Walter meant. I was sitting right there. Corey ran to the elevator lobby and pressed the button 6 times, even though the car was already gone. He stood there, jacket off, tie loosened, staring at closed steel doors. By Monday morning, Sterling and Cross called Lane Capital's finance office. The credit line my father had spent 30 years building trust for, and one very expensive dinner trying to protect, was placed under a 90-day review. He called Viridian's main office that afternoon. He'd looked up the number and reached the general voicemail. Audrey, it's your father. Call me. I listened to the message once in my office, then deleted it. He called 4 more times that week. I didn't answer any of them. The weeks after the dinner were quiet for me and loud for everyone else. Lane Capital's credit review wasn't personal. It was standard protocol, the kind that kicks in whenever a fund's assets drop 40% in 18 months. The dinner just made Charles pay closer attention to numbers he'd been willing to overlook. My father sent an email, 3 paragraphs long. He wrote that he'd been hard on me because he wanted me to be strong, that the industry was unforgiving and he'd been preparing me for it, that he'd always believed in me but expressed it poorly. Nowhere in the email did the words, "I'm sorry," appear. I didn't respond. Renata called my mother. Tell Audrey to call her father. He can't sleep, he's barely eating. My mother, who had raised me alone on a teacher's salary while my father bought a 6-bedroom house with a heated pool, said simply, Audrey is a grown woman, she'll call when she's ready. Corey posted a photo of himself at his desk with the caption, excited about the next chapter. Nobody liked it. His colleagues had been at that dinner. They'd seen everything. 2 senior partners resigned the following week, citing culture concerns. In the quant world, the whispers spread fast. Walter Lane's daughter runs Viridian Capital? The Viridian Capital? I went back to work. Every morning at 5:45, laptop open, models running, coffee in hand. The algorithm didn't care about family drama. Neither did I. 2 weeks after the dinner, my father walked into Charles's office at Sterling and Cross. Charles told me about it in January, during our quarterly review, saying he'd almost decided not to, then decided I deserved to know. My father hadn't come to discuss the credit line. He sat down across from the desk where I'd signed my prime brokerage agreement 4 years earlier and asked one question. Is she happy? Charles looked at him. I think she is. My father sat with that for 30 seconds. Charles counted, then said quietly, almost to himself, I taught that girl nothing. Everything she has, she built alone. Charles didn't argue. My father stood, walked to the door, put a hand on the frame, and stopped. Charles, don't tell her I asked. Charles told me anyway, because he thought I should know that somewhere underneath the wine and the cufflinks and 30 years of ego, there was a man who understood exactly what he'd done. He just couldn't say it to the person who needed to hear it. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't call him, not out of anger, but because I knew one phone call wouldn't undo 7 years. Because healing doesn't happen over coffee. Because my father asking Charles if I was happy was the closest thing to an apology he was capable of, and I had to decide whether that was enough. It wasn't. But it was something. In January, I wrote him an email. 5 sentences, drafted on a Sunday morning on my apartment floor, laptop on the coffee table, my mother's bracelet catching the light from the window. Dad, I heard you ask Charles if I was happy. The answer is yes. I don't need an apology, and I'm not offering one. But if you ever want to have a real conversation, not as CEO to nobody, but as father to daughter, you know where to find me. Until then, I wish you well. Audrey. I read it 4 times, changed nothing, and hit send. The red receipt came back 4 minutes later. He'd opened it almost immediately. I pictured him at his desk, or maybe in that same study where he once told me to skip college, reading 5 sentences from the daughter he'd spent 7 years not calling. No reply came that day, or the next, or the week after. Maybe one day he'll write back. Maybe he won't. I said what I needed to say. Not to win, not to wound, but to leave the door unlocked on my side. What he does with that is his choice. 3 months after that dinner, here's where things stand. Viridian Capital now manages $16 billion. We hired 8 more people, bringing our team to 31. I still get to the office by 5:45. I still wear the same watch and the same bracelet. I still don't do interviews. Lane Capital's credit line was renewed for 6 months, not because of me. Charles's evaluation was independent, and the numbers justified a conditional extension, but with stricter terms and 2 new independent directors added to the board. For the first time in 30 years, my father doesn't have sole decision-making power over his own firm. It didn't collapse. But it isn't entirely his anymore either. Renata went quiet. She stopped calling my mother, stopped hosting events. A couple of her old friends pulled their invitations to the spring gala, and she didn't fight it. Corey is still a vice president, but the 2 partners who resigned took their client relationships with them. He's working longer hours now, without shortcuts, without anyone handing him anything for the first time in his life. Whether that breaks him or builds him isn't my story to tell. My mother and I have dinner every Thursday at a small Italian place in New Haven. She always orders the same thing, rigatoni with red sauce and a glass of house white. I order whatever's new on the menu. We talk about her students, my company, whatever book she's reading. We don't talk about my father unless she brings him up, and she rarely does. She wears her bracelet every day, so do I. 2 silver bracelets, no inscription, no stones, just plain silver worn by a school teacher and a fund manager who learned everything that mattered at the same kitchen table. I also started mentoring, a small program for young women in quantitative finance, analysts and coders and mathematicians who look around their trading floors and don't see anyone who looks like them. I meet with 4 of them once a month, and I tell them the same thing every time. The math is enough. You are enough. Don't let anyone's opinion become your ceiling. Here's what I know now. The people who tell you that you'll never make it aren't predicting your future. They're confessing their fear that you will. And when you do, you don't owe them a victory speech. You owe yourself a quiet Tuesday morning, a good algorithm, and a mother who picks up on the first ring. That's my story. 7 years of silence, 1 dinner, and a banker who finally said what I never needed to say myself. If this reminded you that your worth was never up for a vote, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.